We all like humor, but sometimes humor can cross the line into the profane. Where should a Christian draw the line, and when does humor become sinful? Tonight, Wayne Rogers and Matthew Jones will join Mike Hickson on GBNLive.
Live from the Gospel Broadcasting Network located just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Be a part of today's episode by calling in or interacting with us through Facebook. Now from Olive Branch, Mississippi, it's GBN Live.
Good evening and welcome to GBN Live. I'm Mike Hickson, so glad to be with you tonight. We hope that you will stay with us for the next hour as we discuss the subject, when does humor cross the line into the profane? And I think this is a great subject. And gentlemen, we're glad to be together tonight to study this great topic. And I guess as we begin and as we think about humor, first and foremost, to let people know that we do believe in and appreciate humor. I think the Lord wants us to be happy and to enjoy life.
Absolutely.
And I think about the words of Solomon, a merry heart does good like medicine. And so to be able to laugh and to enjoy life, I think it's a great thing. We do want to invite you to please give us a call tonight. You can reach us at 888-805-3390. Feel free to email us at gbnlive@gbntv.org. We would be happy to take your questions and comments tonight as we study together, when does humor cross the line into the profane? Let's begin by first of all talking about the importance of governing our speech, our tongue. I think sometimes that we tend to categorize sin. And it may be the case that we step across certain boundaries without even knowing it. And the words of James in chapter 2 when he said, "So speak and so do as those who will be judged by the law of liberty," which says to me that not only will we be held accountable for our actions, but also for our words. And so, do you think people in the church, and even some out of the church, do you think that we give enough consideration to our speech?
I don't think so. I think a lot of times, and just like you were stating, along with our actions, our words, we have to keep them in check, just as we do our actions, because they can go too far, whether it be humor, whether it be involved in humor, or whether it be even in just conversation with someone. We have to be concerned about those with whom we're talking, and as well as the actual words that we use, because we'll be judged by all of that.
Yes, absolutely. Matt, as you think about the implications of our study tonight, and I think that all of us have a deep appreciation for humor. And sometimes maybe it's because we want attention, maybe there are other reasons, but there are times when maybe we're not as careful as we should be. And so are there some tips that would help us make sure that we don't cross that line?
Well, I think just in the opening of what you discussed, you tied a couple things together that are very important to look at together, which is, yes, it's good to have humor. It's good to have a sense of humor and to have fun. But then the passage you bring from James about being judged by the law of liberty. There's much liberty in Christ, and we ought to enjoy that liberty. But the fact of the matter is, even the law of liberty obviously has its limitations because we'll be judged by it. So if I'm thinking about tips, then one of the most important ones is this. I have to continue to do what, again, James told me to do in James chapter 1, and I have to continue to consider the Scriptures as a mirror and look into that mirror and check myself. And I was speaking with Wayne just before the show and said, there's actually one part of my personality that I've been curtailing recently because I was realizing I would tell jokes and I have a very dry sense of humor sometimes, and people were not realizing I was joking. And I said, I'm going to have to switch my speech up to make sure I say I'm just joking when I say a joke, because people would hear me be dry. So I think a big part of it is just recognizing when I speak, think about it and consider what effect it has on the people around me and how it lines up with God's Word.
Absolutely. And as we talk about the book of James, I've often said that the book of James is one of the most practical books in Scripture. As a matter of fact, the Old Testament counterpart would be Proverbs. And if you look at the emphasis that James really places on the tongue. For example, in chapter 1, verse 26, if anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, he said this one's religion is useless or vain. In chapter 3, he spends a considerable amount of time talking about the importance of keeping the tongue in check. And he talks about how a little member boasts great things. And you think about how much trouble we can get into with our tongue if we don't exercise caution.
I think that when it comes to humor and telling jokes and our words in general, they're attached to our personalities. And so much like we all have different personalities, our speech patterns are different. The way that we talk and carry ourselves is often different as well. And sometimes our humor is often different. And so sometimes it's the case that our humor might be different because, like you said a moment ago, we're trying to maybe get attention by telling a joke. Or it may be the case that, just a natural thing happened and it was funny, and so there's a difference in that. And so in each of those situations, you have to look as well and consider those with whom you are with, and because it may be funny to you, but it may be not funny to the individual that you're sitting across from, and you need to be considerate of that.
Yeah, absolutely. In the book of Ephesians in chapter 5, Paul said in verse 3, "But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints." And we understand the problems associated with fornication, living an unclean life, demonstrating greediness or covetousness in life. But then he lumps into this passage of Scripture such things as filthiness, foolish talking, and coarse jesting. And then he goes on to say, which I think is extremely important, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. Again, this idea of recognizing who we are, whose we are, and the fact that Christian deportment or behavior is a must. And so what about this idea of filthiness? What's Paul talking about here?
Well, if you look in Ephesians 4 and 5, the general context in which this scripture takes place is the Ephesians are evidently struggling with this problem of purity and of conducting themselves in this way. You get into this concept of filthiness, and he has several things. I mean, it progresses as he talks here, but when he talks about this filthiness, the word being referenced here is that which is foul talking. It's a speech that is coarse and brutal, and it's interesting. If you go through, several commentators will point out that the word for filthiness here does not necessarily have to be speech. And I think anybody who has been around someone who is behaving filthily can understand that sometimes somebody doesn't have to say a word,
That's right,
but they can convey a thought by a filthy action.
A gesture.
A gesture, even a certain look that they give, and it carries with it a clear indication of what they're thinking, and they can carry across something that is it's filthy, it's disgusting. It's the reason that I don't go to a garbage can when I'm looking for something clean and delicious to eat. It's not the right place to be. It's filthy.
That's right. So he talks about filthiness and then foolish talking. What would that mean based on what Paul is saying here?
Strong's used an interesting word to express what this means: buffoonery or silly talking.
One writer, as a matter of fact, one writer did say that.
Yeah, and so you have the idea of this silly talking. So you go from that which is obscene and shameful with the idea of filthiness. You connect to that the idea of just general silliness that has no real edification involved in it, has no nothing good for anybody. Buffoonery tells us that it's taken it to a place that is even far-reaching than that, and it could be an act that somebody's putting on. Some might say that even slapstick comedy might fall into buffoonery, into that kind of action. And so is that the kind of thing that a Christian needs to be involved in? When you connect it with these things, lasciviousness and other things mentioned there, then filthiness, that which is either by gesture or talk, that which is obscene and shameful, and then silliness that might be connected to that as well.
One writer used the words empty-headed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but think about people who get out and get tanked up on alcohol. And many of us have seen individuals who are intoxicated, and some of the things that they will say are so foolish and I've often wondered if people could only see themselves as they really are when they're drunk. They act foolish. I think that's what Paul is talking about to some extent.
Well, and I think too, you've seen people, sometimes just the shocked look on our face sometimes tells the tale. Somebody will say something and you go, I can't believe they just said that. Yeah. There was, without thinking, something that was just blurted out, and so that to me would fall into that realm, that kind of.
The contrast, based on what you're saying, in Proverbs 31, the Bible talks about the worthy woman and the wonderful attributes that she demonstrates. And one of those attributes, he said, she opens her mouth in wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. And I think about somebody who is very careful. They think before they speak. Peter's a great example of somebody who often blurted out things, but never, he failed to really get his mind into gear before his mouth. And as a result of that, he paid a heavy price at times. What about coarse jesting?
Yeah, that's well. I have a thought here. You go filthiness, foolish talking. We end up here at coarse jesting, and what it seems is that you almost have like a broad to narrow here, in the sense of when you start with filthiness, it's filthy, yes, but it could be a gesture, it could be anything. You get down to this concept of what we discussed of foolish talking, the words of a fool, and the way that the Bible refers to a fool. But when you get to this concept of coarse jesting, this jesting, everything I've read on this, it's interesting that these words aren't used. A lot of times you'll do a word study on something. These words, several of these words in this verse are unique to this passage in the Bible. And in fact, this word jesting, the foolish talking, it's in Aristotle, but even there it's rarely used, even in classical Greek. So when we understand these things, we have to understand them simply from their definition. And this idea of jesting gives an idea of almost like a fencer. This is the filthy man, or the foolish talking man is the buffoon, like we talked about. It's the just out of place. This concept of jesting would be a skillful use. This is that person who they're not a foolish person.
They know how to turn a phrase.
They're turning that phrase, and they're doing it in a way that's inappropriate.
That's right. And sometimes I think individuals will say something, but there is an underlying meaning that they're trying to convey.
Right.
And so I think sitcoms do this sometimes. Yeah. They'll say something, but underneath they're trying to convey something that's really dirty.
The master of this, the master of jesting, if you want to understand what it is, William Shakespeare. And people don't often understand. I was an English major in college. I acted in Shakespeare plays. Shakespeare was a perverse man, but he was not very often was he foolish. No, he would turn something. He would insert something that was clever, but had a sexual connotation behind it. And in fact, much of Shakespeare is inappropriate, but it's done cleverly.
Well, I think that's one of the things that writers in television do, and that is they portray a lot of sexual innuendo through some of the varying scenes or whatnot. And so, they're very clever at what they do. I've got a question that's come in. What about sharing a post on Facebook, cuss words that someone else said, like in political postings? Where is the limit?
Well, obviously, if it has cussing in it, it has no place in the public, whether Christian or not. But certainly, as Christians, we have a responsibility to make sure that that's not a part of our life, which is what Ephesians chapter 4 and 5. That's what we've been talking about. That's what it's really about. It's walking in love as Christ has loved us, and that whole passage is talking about how we walk, how we live our daily lives, and then to include in that conversation that we have. And Facebook is just a way that we have another way that we have a conversation. Right. So it's just a social way of doing that. I'd like to go back to the coarse jesting for just a moment, and I think the point that was made is excellent. A word that we often use is wit, and that's the idea. It's that knowledge, and sometimes we talk about folks that are quick-witted. Yep. Well, again, this is the idea of having a knowledge and a wisdom of how to turn that phrase, but a wit that is one that is involved in vulgarity.
Yeah. That's right.
And so one writer even called it low jesting.
Yeah.
So it has to do with humor, but it's the way that humor is used in order to bring or add to something that is vulgar. And I would add the idea too that, you know, comedians today, and I would go back even, this kind of ties into the Facebook question, you know, comedians today, a lot of them hide themselves under the guise, well, we're just being funny. And so we can say anything as long as there are people laughing, then we can say pretty much anything. Well, that's not the case.
Right.
Truly, it's not, and that's what we read in these passages. We can have good humor, and it helps us to learn to smile. It helps our countenance. It helps our hearts. It helps us feel better in that way. Whereas this low jesting, this coarse humor that's crude and cruel to many people, offensive in many ways, has no place in the Christian life.
Well, and you know, I think going back to what Matt said, in addition to your comments there, you know, if you look at the book of Ephesians, Paul is writing to Christians,
right?
And he contrasts the old man with the new man, and as you said a moment ago, I think that what we need to understand is that as Christians, particularly people who are coming out of the world, sometimes they bring baggage with them from the world. And it's very difficult sometimes to cut bait or cut ties to the world. And so if we're not careful, we can bring those things into the Christian life. And as a result of that, our conduct is not what it ought to be. And I think about what Paul said to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, let no one despise your youth, but be an example of the believers in word, in conduct. And, you know, Paul here, and the seriousness about what we're discussing tonight, listen to this. In the same context, for this you know that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. And then he goes on to say, let no one deceive you with empty or vain words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. So what he's saying there, if I understand it correctly, is it can cost us our soul.
Absolutely. And verse 7, if you add that to it, is do not be partakers with them.
That's right.
You know,
That's
obviously
right.
This is something that he's comparing to those around them, those who are outside the body of Christ. Those who were coming into the body of Christ, they were having difficulty stepping out of that old man and his ways and putting on that new man and living a new life in Christ. And so Paul is very much dealing with that. And he says, if you continue that way with them, you're not going to inherit the kingdom of God.
Yeah, and you know, if you look at verse 8, he said, you were once darkness.
Yeah.
But now he said, you're light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. And of course, Jesus was the light of the world, and we're to follow in his footsteps. And so what we're talking about from a practical standpoint can be a problem in the lives of many people.
I think so.
And I think sometimes as Christians, and you know, again, sometimes we tend to categorize sin, and when it comes to the tongue, we say, well, you know, that's really not that big a deal. But I think what Paul is saying is, it is a big deal.
Well, Jesus said it was a big deal because our Lord tells us in multiple accounts that that the mouth speaks out of the abundance of the heart. So it's interesting, when we do these things in Ephesians, when we say these things in the latter part of Ephesians 4 that we've outlined here in Ephesians 5, it's not just that the action itself is sinful. It is, but it also speaks to the fact that before you spoke it, your heart was in the wrong place. Right. You were already in the wrong place with God because of the place that your heart was in order to say the thing.
Okay, so based on what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus talks about the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. The evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. And to put it in our vernacular today, garbage in, garbage out. Wholesome things in, wholesome things out. So wouldn't that say something about how careful we ought to be with regard to what we listen to, what we watch, the people with whom we interact?
Yeah, and that's part of the thing we talk about, not taking account of ourselves, not thinking about it enough. And for an example, I brought you something for tonight. They normally give us waters, but I brought you some water to drink.
Thanks.
That's for you. And I don't want you to
pass.
I want you to drink that. You look at that water, and it's obvious when you look at that water that water's disgusting. It's got grass floating in it. It's got dirt settling now. We get that. But here's what I want you to believe. I will accept it because you can tell me, you can point it at and show me that that's dirty. But I want you to turn around and accept this fact. Yes, that's dirty, but it came from a pure source. But that's what we do with this kind of coarse jesting. This is what we do with this kind of filthy talk, is even in the moment that we identify that it's dirty, we pretend it came from a pure source. I spoke wickedness out of a pure heart. And the fact of the matter is, if there's any pattern at all to my wickedness, it's not out of a pure heart.
Well, great points. And I think, since we're in Matthew chapter 12, with regard to the severity of what we're discussing tonight, listen to what Jesus said. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So the Lord holds us accountable for everything that we say. And I think sometimes, the word idle here, the idea of careless. And I think sometimes that's what happens. We are careless with our speech when it comes to telling jokes, or, sometimes, and we want to talk a little bit about locker room talk as well, because I think sometimes people say, well, it's just a bunch of guys and we're all together, so what's the Lord think about that? We're going to take a break. We'll be right back in a couple of minutes. Hope you'll stay with us.
I'm sitting down with John King with the Churches of Christ Disaster Response Team. John, tell us a little bit about DRT.
Well, DRT is a response organization that goes in and assists people and churches during a disaster. Typically what we do is we try to find a host church in the area, and we try to support them as they support their community. Typically what we do is we supply manpower, volunteers come in, and then we house them and we support as we go through that. We have some equipment that we bring in with that. We have heavy equipment, we have tool trailers, we have the shower trailer. Of course, everybody needs a shower during that. And then we have a mobile kitchen. So we can pretty much work independent with trying to support that church.
So if somebody's in a disaster zone or wants to help folks in the disaster zone, DRT is the place to go?
That's true, and you can reach out to us. We have a website you can go look at, and we also have a Facebook page. If you want to get connected, sign up for an email, and we'll send you emails when we're doing something.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being with us, John.
May I still thy goodness prove, while the hope of endless glory fills my heart with joy and love.
Thank you for tuning into GBN Live. If you have a question related to tonight's topic that you would like to have answered, please call 888-805-3390. That's 888-805-3390. You can also email us at gbnlive@gbntv.org. Like us on Facebook and follow us live each week. You can send your questions through Facebook in the comments section, and we will do our best to get them answered on the air. Now back to the program.
Thank you for staying with us. We hope that you will continue with us for the duration of our program tonight as we discuss when does humor cross the line into the profane. We had an email question earlier by Curtis, and he referenced social media, Facebook. And one of the thoughts that I had, and I want to go back to it for just a moment or two, and that is, I think if we're not careful, we can use social media in a very non-productive, unchristian way. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, I personally do not engage in Facebook, some of the other things, but I do know that it can be problematic. And sometimes we take sayings out of the world and use them on our own posts. For example, OMG, and think nothing of it. And I know sometimes people will do that multiple times in a post, never giving thought that they're taking the Lord's name in vain. So what type of rules do you think we ought to consider with regard to quote unquote social media?
That's a good one for Wayne.
Thank you. I think that when it comes to social media, and I use social media, different platforms of it, and I think you do have to be careful. I think you also with regards to also even helping young people to better navigate through the waters of social media, and they are rather deep waters because it can go, it can be used for good. Obviously, it can be used for bad. So you try to tread in a way that will show others that way, and that's why I've been on it before. I thought, well, if I could be a good example and show someone, how it could be used in a good way, then that's good. Not to say that I've always done it perfectly or anything like that. I think that we have to always keep ourselves in check the same way, with our words. And because this is an outlet, social media is an outlet of our speech, if we just simply repost something that someone else has put out there without looking at it and taking into consideration and asking those same questions, is this something I would speak?
Yeah.
Is this something that I would say in conversation sitting right here with the three of us? Would we have this conversation? Would I use this type of language and make that kind of statement? Would I do it in a public setting in front of 100 people, 1,000 people? I think you need to put it out there in that way. Would I use this kind of language? Well, it's just a meme. It's just a picture. Well, if a picture has words on it, or if a picture itself is vulgar, like we were talking about a moment ago, if it would be like a gesture. It'd be the same type of thing, So I think there again, you have to consider and you have to look within. Are these words that I would speak? And want to be judged by.
Would it be wrong to ask the question, what would Jesus say?
I don't think so.
The old phrase, what would Jesus do? But what would he say? Yeah. If he has left us an example to follow in his steps, as Peter said, then, that might be a good question to ask before we post something.
Sure.
Would the Lord do that? You mentioned the fact that you try to use it for good, and I think a lot of people do, and I'm grateful for that. But I think sometimes, if we're not careful, we get down in the gutter with the world,
right.
And before you know it, we're wallowing in the mire with the world.
Right. And that's an important distinction. That too is that works for you if you know the Lord according to the Scriptures. There are those in society today. If you say that question, what would Jesus say, or would Jesus laugh at this? But there's those in the world today who now they kind of gotten in the gutter a little bit, and they've tried to bring Jesus down to them. So it's also to remember that He is holy.
Right.
He's holy. He is set apart, and He's set us apart and made us holy if we truly know Him. And so it's got to be with a reverence of who He is, and with a reverence of who He is. And I don't get the whole thing where the guys are wearing the T-shirts that have irreverent phrases about Jesus on them and trying to bring Him down and make Him base. No, He's a holy God. And how would He feel about this?
The Hebrew writer, you just touched a nerve. The Hebrew writer said in Hebrews chapter 7 that Jesus is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, made higher than the heavens, which suggests, as you said a moment ago, His holiness. And Peter would say that we are to be holy as He is holy. We've been sanctified, set apart, and I think sometimes maybe we forget that, sadly. Now the questions come in. What suggestions do you have for parents who are trying to encourage their children to laugh at good, clean fun and to avoid profane humor?
Just avoid the profane humor, but accept as early as you can that as a dad you're just not funny. And that's going to help you a lot. Help them avoid the profane, encourage them to have pure things. But you yourself, I don't know, maybe till they're like 8 or something you can be funny, but after that, it'd be okay with not being funny.
I understand. One of the things that we were talking about at break, and this really I think is a good place to introduce it in light of this question, what about some of the movies and television shows that are so prevalent in our society today, and we as consumers sometimes, and as Christian consumers, we buy in, sadly.
Yeah.
And so what should our view be? Our policy be, I guess, as a Christian?
Could you ask this question to Dad and to Mom? What are you watching with your children? Fine, that's a good question. But the next question is this, and it's just as important, and you're lying to yourself if you won't answer correctly. What do you watch after you put the kids to bed? Because that's going to affect your children. Integrity. If you put your kids to bed and then you watch inappropriate things, you laugh at things that you wouldn't want your children to laugh at, you can forget about it. You would chalk it up. Because someday they're going to figure that out, or they're going to see you chuckle at something in a moment. If I'm training my heart to love impurity, when my children are asleep in their beds, then I'm going to exhibit that. First of all, it's wrong. Second, I'm going to exhibit that before them in their lives.
Great points, great points.
And I think you also, one of the things and a lesson I think for us all is sometimes we just have to turn it off. We just have to turn it off. Sometimes we just let it run and run and say, well, I'm really waiting for the next show to come on, but we've just let it run and run through this one, and the next one's not better either, but it's...
Yeah, I think we have two options. There is an off button, and the other option is we can change the channel.
Sure.
And sometimes maybe we fail in that we don't turn it off or we don't change the channel, and so as a result of that, we continuously imbibe in what we're seeing and hearing, and before you know it, we are sucked into the world. And John said, love not the world, neither the things which are in the world. If any man loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. It's interesting to me that when I look at the scriptures, it's almost as if there is a progression. Because Paul talks about how we're not to be conformed to the world. James in chapter 4 talks about friendship with the world, and typically before you love somebody, you befriend them. You become a friend. And then what happens? You fall in love with the world. And before you know it, you act like the world, you talk like the world, you dress like the world. And so, bottom line, you're in the world.
Just like Psalm 1, the idea of standing, walking, and then now sitting down with in the seat of the scornful. As it pertains to the question that came in a moment ago, I think it's interesting that, yes, we need to be a people of integrity as well, as the point's been well made. We also need to teach our children. There are going to be things that they are going to see, and some of those opportunities, we may not have realized this scene was in this movie or TV show. And obviously age matters of the conversation that we're having with our children, but it should be an opportunity also then to teach children and to help them. Of course, we see it and it goes too far, then we're going to shut it off. But now we need to have a conversation. Why did mom and dad shut the TV off? Why did we change the channel? Why did we do this? Not just leave it as, well, we just can't watch that. Because I think there's, then it becomes almost taboo, and the older they get, as they do get older, they're gonna, well, let's go and check that out because mom and dad are not looking. Now we can go check that out. Sure. But if you have that conversation and you're teaching and training your children along the way, as age appropriate as it is, then I think that they're going to understand, and you're going to be able to teach them the difference between good, clean humor and funny, and that which is vulgar and profane and sinful.
I think what we're talking about tonight could potentially strike a nerve in the hearts and lives of just about everybody within the church, because we're all faced with this. And when I look at television today, when I was a young fella growing up, television by and large was pretty tame. I mean, I remember my dad loving to watch the Andy Griffith Show, and he loved Barney Fife. And I love Barney Fife. And you think about the evolution of television and the erosion. And we talk about the influence of the media and Hollywood and what a tremendous influence they exert on society. And really, in a way, television, movies, media are but a reflection of society today. Because you look at the erosion in our country today, and we talk about as the home goes, so goes the nation. Our nation's in trouble because our homes are in trouble, and some of that is because of what we feed on, what we do for entertainment, and as a result of that, we buy in.
Yeah, and I've actually, you mentioned that. It's 2018. I've got some statistics here from Joe Wells' book, Game Plan, in which he has a bubble here, and he talks about the progression from 2005 to 2010. So it's come a long way since then, but even between 2005 to 2010, the use of profanity in primetime broadcasting programming increased 69.3% just in those 5 years. The greatest increase and the use of the harshest profanities occurred in the 8 p.m. Eastern time, which is considered the family hour time. That's when it was mostly increasing. And then the biggest one to me was this. In the industry, they have what they consider the worst cuss word out there. That word increased on television between 2005 to 2010 during this time frame, prime time, 2,409% from 2005 to 2010. And so when you consider that and you think about if I treated my TV like a man who was visiting my home, at what point would I ask him to leave?
Wow, great point. I read statistically a while back a movie that came out maybe within the last 5 years. If I were to call one of the actors' names, everyone would know this person. But they said one explicit word, profane word, was used, if I recall correctly, some 400 to 500 times in the movie. And you know, I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on the English language to some extent. And I have dictionaries in my office. To me, that shows the ignorance of some of the writers today. And the fact that people would buy into that filth. I can't imagine sitting in a movie theater with a woman at my side and listening to that kind of garbage, and yet people don't think anything about it.
But Mike, I've seen a leader in the church post on a social media site that he went with people in the church to a movie that has a particular expletive over 200 times in it. You want to talk about how it's bad, and our society's bad. What's really bad and what's absolutely detrimental, we can't change Hollywood, but we can change how we interact with Hollywood. And what's really, really bad is when I, as a Christian, and our young people do it all the time, put out there, I'm watching this show. In their conversations, I'm watching this show. Or especially if we are deacons, elders, ministers, and we're approving of these things by our participation and by going back to social media, by posting, here I am at this movie. We can't do it. We can't.
Pretty sobering.
Yeah.
Pretty sobering. What about locker room talk? I know that, and one of the questions that we have tonight, should there be a difference in the jokes that we tell in mixed company and those we tell, quote unquote, in the locker room?
Well, locker room talk, as soon as you put that, that quote around that phrase, to me, the kind of talking that's taking place is not good for anyone. And so it makes no difference who's there, mixed company or not, at that point. When I think of locker room talk, that's it, to me it's the gutter talk. It's vulgar. It's those definitions that we laid out a moment ago. That's the very essence of it in those places. And generally has to do with gestures and everything else going on in a locker room. And anybody that's ever been in a locker room understands what I'm talking about. So,
yeah, there was a time in our country when men used profanity in many areas, many sectors of society, and if a woman came into their presence, they would curtail their profanity, or they would say, "Excuse me, ma'am." But women today can outcuss men. I mean, there are some women today that are so profane, and I'm not trying to throw women to the curb. I appreciate women. I especially appreciate godly women, but I have heard some women that would make a sailor blush in some of the things that they say. And when I think about a Christian using that kind of language, it's just it's hard to imagine.
Yes, I have a close friend who played for the University of Arkansas. He started for the University of Arkansas as a cornerback, and he lived in those locker rooms. He was in that locker room, Bobby Petrino, and you hear the stories of the way that the coaches, these guys who were supposed to be mentors to them, would speak to them,
like
and
dogs.
the kind of language they would use, and that they would use, and you think to it and you say, locker room talk. I'm all for locker room talk. Locker room talk should be a bunch of guys who are talking about common goals, working together as a team, I'm not okay with locker room talk when it's a euphemism for sinful speech. I hate that term because it really is just a euphemism. What we're talking about when we talk about locker room talk is we're talking about sinful, perverted speech, cursing, and that's wrong. No matter if a woman's in the room or not, it's just wrong to do. And frankly, if I'm in a position of authority over a young man, I ought to be, because those same coaches who will say these perverted things to them in that locker room, they're the same ones who will suspend them when they behave in a perverted way toward a young lady. Right. But how in the world do you expect to pour perversion into their minds, but then expect them in their lives to exhibit a righteous living?
That's a great question. Great question.
Absolutely.
Great question. And you know, which I think raises an interesting question. As a parent, do you want your child playing for a coach that has a gutter mouth?
I certainly wouldn't.
No.
Absolutely not. And you know, it's interesting because our boys played baseball early on, and I would help coach, and being around some of the other, and the reason that I got into to start helping another coach was so that I could kind of help with the calendar of things, and when we were playing ball and practicing and some of those things. So I got involved in that way. It was a great outlet for the community as well. But it also put me around other people that I soon realized in the community, here's 6 other teams, and the coaches, they don't think the same way. And it become, all of a sudden you walk away from the kids and you're over here in the corner, and there's a coaches conference, if you will, before we start the season or anything like that. And all of a sudden the level of conversation just went in the gutter. It turned completely off, and I appreciate them not doing that around the kids. Yeah. But I don't want them to do that around me either, and to make that, and I made clear, I said, guys, I can't be around this kind of language, and I appreciate you walking away from the young people to have this conversation, but I don't want to be a part of this conversation at all.
Which I think raises an interesting question. As a Christian, how should we act or react when someone who is not a Christian begins to use profanity, or let's say begins to tell an off-color joke or some profane joke, etc.? How should we react to that?
I think you got to protest with your vote. You talk about it before, you don't have to agree with everything your government does, but every so many years an election comes along and you cast your vote. I think you do the same thing here. Guy tells a dirty joke, you don't laugh. You go to Romans 1:32, them that take pleasure in them that do these things. I'm not going to take pleasure in what you're doing. Now the thing is, if I'll sit at home tonight and laugh at some perversion on television, I'm being a hypocrite. But if I'm living my life pure and I'm trying to get close to God and I'm trying to keep my mind close to godliness, and so that when you tell this joke, it really is strange to me and it's outside of what I am okay with, and I just don't laugh. And then I'm going to look for an opportunity to discuss it. If you're not a Christian, I'm going to look for an opportunity to tell you, hey, look, I didn't laugh. I'm not trying to be rude to you. I don't laugh at that kind of humor because I'm a Christian, and see if that can open up a conversation with them about why that is.
Find those opportunities to talk about those things. Why it is that I don't want to be around that. Why I'm not going to put up with that around me or my children and stuff like that. I think that you look for those opportunities.
That's right. And ask yourself, why was I there? During that, am I there in that conversation just for fun, or is this a work meeting and I had to be there?
Right.
Because if I'm just there for fun, I probably need to also be careful about where I'm going.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a break that we're going to take right now. We will be back in a couple of minutes. Hope you'll stay with us for the remainder of our program.
Hello, my name is Nathan Franson, author of Breaking the Chains. After growing up in the LDS Church, I walked away from it about the age of 20 years old. A lot of people have asked me why I decided to leave it, and they're often curious about my reasons. Seldom is anyone let out of a religion without a lot of contemplation. Most of the time, it involves a process based on their own investigation or something that they've heard. It was through my own study and questioning which led to my decision. There were beliefs and doctrines that were taught that caused me to start questioning it and doubting the viability of a religion that had basically dictated my whole childhood. I had questions about different subjects that were often answered with either inconclusive or ambiguous replies by my teachers and my bishop. It came to a point where the more I sought clarification, the more disconnected I felt. Breaking the Chains is an autobiography detailing the reasons that I decided I could no longer be a part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It covers a number of their teachings, along with the error and discrepancies of each belief. Throughout the book, the Bible is held as the only standard of authority while weighing the evidence. If you are interested in learning about many of the LDS beliefs yourself, this is a good resource to have in your library. Perhaps you know someone or are studying with someone of the LDS persuasion. In either case, I invite you to read Breaking the Chains. It likely will answer questions that you have had about Mormonism. The book is available through my website, www.mormonstudy.net, or Azimuth Media. Thank you for your interest in learning about and reaching those who deserve to know the truth.
The Gospel Broadcasting Network is proud to bring you GBN Live. To have your questions answered on the program, please call us at 888-805-3390. That's 888-805-3390. Please try to keep your questions relevant to tonight's topic. If you have a different topic that you would like to have discussed on GBN Live, please email your request to gbnlive@gbntv.org, and we will do our best to accommodate your request.
Thank you for staying with us. We are going to conclude in just a moment our study tonight, When Does Humor Cross the Line into the Profane? One of the things that we want to discuss in the final portion of our program tonight has to do with the influence or leavening of our speech and what we say or what we listen to. And you know, in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, Solomon said, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but a companion of fools will be destroyed." And so when I think about influence, whether for good or bad, a lot of it comes back to who I associate with. And hopefully and prayerfully, I can be a leavening agent for good, but sometimes I think if we're not careful, we're the opposite. So what about this idea of being an influence for good?
It's a tough thing, because the fact of the matter is, if you take this seriously and you follow God in this, and you take Ephesians 5 to heart and other passages about this pure speech, the fact of the matter is people are going to view you as what they might term a prude, or you're just, you're not in touch. And some people even have this concept, and maybe these coaches who talk this way have this concept, and maybe these parents who talk this, that I've got to get down on their level. I've got to get down where the kids are. And the fact of the matter is, what I need to do is not get down on their level. The fact of the matter is, I need to try as hard as I can, draw nigh to God and He'll draw nigh to you. I need to try as hard as I can to get as close as I can to God's level, and then exhibit that to them. But the problem is, if the guy next to me is trying to get on their level, and I'm trying to say, let's hold the godly, what's going to be more popular? Well, you know what's going to be more popular, because you don't turn on Comedy Central and see men trying to talk as though they're godly. What's going to be more popular is that other thing, and the leavening effect can be in a congregation, and it can be that all we need is for this type of speech to be viewed as okay among the dads, among the deacons, among the elders, among the ministers. All we need is some level of that to be okay, and it'll spread and it'll move, because that's the popular thing in the world today. That's where the world's pulling them. Sure. The question is, where am I as a minister of God, as an elder, as a deacon, as a father, as a godly man or woman in this congregation? Which way am I pulling the young people as they're coming up through this?
If you think about Christianity as a whole, look at the good that it has done wherever it's gone, the gospel. By the same token, our goal ought to be to lift people to a higher plane rather than to live on their plane, or ultimately to sink down into the mire of sin. Another question's come in. Are we not approving any sin if the church is not willing to talk about it from the pulpit?
Make sure I understand the question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand exactly.
If we're afraid to talk about it, are we therefore approving it? I think is maybe what they're getting at there.
Could be. If
I ignore it, if I don't get up and say, people, you can't drink. You can't drink alcohol. And I'm approving it if I won't preach on it.
Which I think begs a great question. Do you think that from the pulpit we give enough attention to the tongue?
Possibly we don't. There's, unless, and a lot of times what we do, and I do this as well, we'll teach our Bible classes, we'll teach them, verse by verse or, through a passage of Scripture, and we may not cover topically until we come across that verse that handles that. If we're in James and we're talking about the tongue, then we'll spend time in that, and then we may not cover it again for quite a while. And the same with our preaching, that happens often as well too. And I was just thinking, and I think I know where she's coming from now, the question, but sometimes it's the case, we preach through both topics and expository or textual sermons, and we cover a variety of things. And over a certain period of time, yes, we are attempting to preach the whole counsel of God, and to stand for the whole counsel of God, and to show that, to do so in our preaching. It is tough to cover every topic.
Yeah, it is.
In a given number of Sundays, and a given number of Bible classes that we might have opportunity to teach as well. But I think we probably do need to cover it a good bit more because of the things that we've been discussing tonight. It does affect so many people.
But in particular with this, where there's a tendency to pretend that the impure thing came from a pure source, in particular with this, and there's some other subjects like this, but we're on this subject, in particular with this subject of the purity of the tongue, I want to see that sermon more than I want to hear it. It's wonderful if you'd go and preach it or teach it, but this is something that happens in everyday life. So I need to see it in everyday life. If you want to be effective with young people, Brother Wells in this book talks about if you want your young people to be pure, they must not be in environments in which impurity is being spoken on a regular basis. Yeah. This sermon's got to be seen, and it's got to be seen by men who are genuine godly leaders.
So really what we're talking about is the source. I mean really it all goes back to the source. And if the well is polluted, then we're in trouble.
Yeah. We're training the heart. We're attempting to reach the heart of man. And I would say I'd add one word to this whole conversation, and that's the idea of being consistent. If we're going to preach this, we need to live this, and living this is preaching that, whether it be from the pulpit or just,
What about, very quickly before our time's gone, what about Philippians chapter 4, verse 8?
Yeah. That is key to this, and thinking on things which, when we're dealing with things which are pure, when we talk about a pure source, pure water, purity, let these things be in your mind. I'll say this, and I think any man who discusses this has to admit, at some point in our lives we've said things that we're not proud of. I know in a particular time in my life, some years ago, in which I said some things that did harm, and I had to make it right with everyone that it did harm to. And I think about what I had to do was not say what I said was so much wrong, but I had to re-dig my well. And I think that if anything, our message is this: if you're listening to this and in your life you recognize your speech is wrong, it's not just saying, oh, that thing I said was wrong. It was examine yourself, re-dig your well, find a pure heart in you, draw close to God with your heart, and have a pure well. If you take it instance by instance, you'll be dishonest with yourself.
And that goes back to even what John the Baptizer was preaching, bringing forth fruit meet for repentance.
Yes.
Where does that begin? That doesn't just begin with the action. That begins in the heart. That's going to change. And so I like the illustration, redigging that well, that pure source. And I think that's great.
So what advice do you have for people? Let's say that there are people watching the program tonight, and in their heart of hearts they're saying guilty as charged, and so they're thinking, I need to make some changes. So what would you suggest?
Well, obviously, what we're talking about, redigging that well and going back, and when we talk about going back, we're talking about going back to Scripture. We're talking about going back to and find that pure source. What is it that God expects of me? What is it that He wants me to do? And examine myself by it. And there may be things that I have yet to realize that I have to change or need to change. And that's self-examination. 2 Corinthians 13:5. That's something that we need to do on a daily basis. And that passage obviously is talking about whether you even be in the faith, and I get that context. But that point is proven over and over. We examine ourselves prior to partaking of the Lord's Supper on a weekly basis. So there is that self-examination that we need to do. We go back and I begin to look. Okay, are the words that I'm using are they coarse words? Am I using gestures that I should not be using? Am I posting things that I shouldn't be posting? Am I putting myself in a place where I'm tempted to do those things also? Because you have to take away the temptation to do those things. And so I would begin there, and I'm sure there's others to add to it.
Well, that's a very good point. And I would say to get started with that, it is like anything else. Break something. That would be my thing. Break something. Sure. If it's a video game, if it's a certain movie, delete some stuff off your phone, delete some stuff off of your account that you have with your movies on it and your TV shows. And the big thing is, if you're going to break something, break what's in the way. Burn it. Do like King Josiah did. Burn it and throw it. And don't throw it to a river, but throw it into a trash can. And get rid of it. And the big thing is, you've got to humble yourself and let the people around you know, I've recognized this in me, and I'm going to redig my well. I'm gonna get a different heart.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, okay, let's say you clean house, you move everything out, the bad, you got to fill it with something.
Absolutely.
And so Philippians 4:8.
That's it.
Fill it up with good stuff. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And purity of life goes a long way. And one other thing I wanted to mention very quickly, I know our time is almost gone, but we didn't address, and we could have, when we talk about the tongue and all the problems associated with that. But sometimes people get involved in gossip, they malign character, they become what I would call a verbal assassin. And if we're not careful, we can use the tongue to denigrate others, for example, before our children. And then, we set a pattern for their behavior later in life as well.
And there's a circle of comedy that attempts to do that as well, and calls it humor, and yet it's vulgar. It's not humor.
It is.
Yeah. And you talk about filling that time. Stop binge watching Family Guy, South Park, whatever other TV show it is you're watching that's bad for you, and start binge watching GBN. Download the GBN app. If you're watching this, you already watched GBN.
That's right.
But there's wholesome things you can, even stuff that's not religious, there's wholesome things that you can fill that time with. Put the Bible in audio on your phone. Put gospel singing in your car. Fill it with something wholesome.
Look, there are plenty of things to fill up the void.
Absolutely.
No question about that. Matt and Wayne, thank you so much.
Thank you
for having us.
Your words of wisdom. You guys did an outstanding job tonight. I appreciate you being here. And the things that you said, very, very helpful. Biblical, helpful, applicable, and hopefully and prayerfully we have helped some people. I think sometimes when we engage in a program like this, we forget about, we're trying to help people. And we're trying to help because we all want to go to heaven.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. And so, again, thank you. Hope you'll come back and be with us again very soon.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate the opportunity to come into your home every week. We thank you. We love you. We hope that you will tune in again next Thursday night. And until then, may the Lord bless and keep you. God bless.
This has been GBN Live. Thank you for watching.